It started like nothing. A Capitol staffer had pressed the button for the private Senate elevator, the one that rarely opened to outsiders. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, in his dark green fatigues and calm eyes, stepped inside silently, flanked by a quiet aide. He was in Washington, D.C. for a closed-door diplomatic engagement, but details were sketchy, even to high-level journalists. The doors began to close, then jammed halfway. A hand, firm and familiar, pried them open. Nancy Pelosi. Flanked by a single security guard, she stepped in, barely glancing at Traoré, until their eyes locked. The air shifted, cold, dense. Political storms do that before they strike. They stood shoulder to shoulder in silence. The elevator hummed. Then, stopped mid-floor. Emergency lights flickered. The silence grew louder. The guard reached for his earpiece, but found no signal. Nancy turned. This must be a mistake. Traoré didn't blink. His voice was low, almost a whisper. Mistakes are how empires fall. The doors stayed shut. This wasn't just an elevator malfunction. It was a reckoning. And Washington, D.C. would never forget what happened inside. The hum of the elevator was the only sound left. Nancy Pelosi, known for her command of rooms and razor-sharp retorts, seemed unsure. Traoré stood with military stillness, calm, composed, yet carrying a fire in his chest that could no longer be held back. 2 minutes passed. No words. No rescue. The Capitol's most secure building had no signal. The security system wasn't responding. Pelosi's guard's hand trembled near his sidearm, but he didn't dare reach. Something about the moment told him not to. Nancy cleared her throat. What do you want? Traoré's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in memory. He thought of the villages burned by foreign-trained militias. He thought of African children coughing in dust, while gold flowed from mines to European banks. He thought of his people being told their independence was a threat to democracy, and then he spoke. Justice. Not for me. For those you never see. Nancy froze. There was weight in his voice that couldn't be debated, not even in Congress. For the first time in years, she listened and didn't interrupt. You sit in marble rooms, Traoré began, while our people sit in sand. The elevator was still frozen. The walls, once silent steel, now held witness to a conversation not meant for cameras or microphones. Pelosi opened her mouth, but paused. For once, she sensed this wasn't a speech. It was history demanding to speak. You send aid, Traoré continued, but take billions in return. You call it diplomacy. We call it a transaction, one written in blood, not ink. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to, because truth doesn't shout. It haunts. He reached into his coat, not for a weapon, but for a folded photograph. A boy. Barefoot, holding a rusted AK-47. My nephew, Traoré said, 12, killed by insurgents armed with American rifles, dumped by the same powers that support democracy. Nancy's lips parted, but her guard stopped her. Ma'am, let him finish. The elevator seemed to shrink. The silence returned. But this time, it wasn't awkward. It was sacred. And as Pelosi's eyes dropped to the photo in his hand, a tear welled up, then fell. Outside, no one knew what was happening. Inside, the world was shifting. Nancy looked down at the worn photo again. Traoré's voice was soft now. His name was Musa. He wanted to become a doctor. Pelosi whispered, I'm sorry. Traoré looked at her. No, you're not. The elevator walls suddenly felt too close. It wasn't about politics anymore, it was about ghosts. My nephew died because your governments needed chaos to sell order. Our children are collateral to your strategy boards. Pelosi swallowed hard. The security guard, still silent, finally spoke. Sir, please. But Traoré raised a hand. Not threatening, but calm. Don't be afraid. I came with truth, not violence. He pulled a small notebook from his chest pocket. Inside, a list of African leaders assassinated or overthrown, since 1960. Every name, every coup, CIA involvement underlined. He handed it to Pelosi. These aren't just names, he said. These are fathers, sons, hope, erased. Pelosi took the notebook with shaking hands. She opened to the second page, where Musa's name had been written in childlike handwriting. Beneath the word, freedom. A tear slid down her cheek. For the first time, she didn't see an enemy. She saw a man carrying the memory of a generation. Pelosi turned to her security guard. Try your override. He pressed the red panel near the emergency hatch and typed a series of numbers. Nothing. The keypad blinked. Access denied. This can't be, he muttered. Traoré watched him without fear. You have systems to protect yourselves, he said, but none to protect us. He turned to Pelosi again. In my country, a mother has to walk 7 miles for clean water. But gold, uranium, and cotton leave our soil by private jet. Nancy looked stunned. Why didn't you say this during the meeting? Traoré leaned forward. Because meetings in Washington are designed to hear everything, except truth. Outside, engineers scrambled, confused why the elevator wasn't responding. But inside, something bigger than mechanics was unfolding. Pelosi sat down on the small bench in the corner. She looked tired, not politically tired, soul tired. What do you want from me? She finally asked. Traoré didn't answer immediately. He just stared at the camera in the corner. I want this footage shown. I want America to see me, and not be afraid. Traoré finally spoke what had been burning in his chest since he landed in the U.S. You speak of democracy, but when we chose leaders you didn't like, you funded coups. When we found our voice, you handed guns to those who would silence us. He looked directly at Pelosi. 961, Patrice Lumumba, Congo. He was 35, wanted freedom. You called him a communist. He was murdered, burned. Nancy's mouth opened. That was the Cold War. That was murder. Traoré snapped. For the first time, his voice cracked, not with rage but with pain. France, the U.S., the West, you didn't just kill a man. You killed a continent's chance to believe. Pelosi bowed her head. The security guard stood still, the air in the elevator thick with a kind of truth rarely spoken out loud in that city. Traoré looked away. My father whispered Lumumba's name every night before he died, he said. Now, I whisper it before I go to war. Nancy stared at him, and for once, she had nothing to say. Outside, the elevator lights flickered back, but inside, everything had already changed. Traoré took a slow breath and reached again into his coat. This time, it wasn't a notebook. It was a bracelet. Beads faded. One of them cracked. He handed it to Pelosi gently. Do you know who this belonged to? She didn't answer. A girl named Aisha, 6 years old. She lost her left eye during a drone strike outside Ouagadougou. The target was a terrorist camp. The missile hit a school instead. Pelosi froze. We didn't know. You always say that, Traoré whispered, but it doesn't grow her eye back. The guard looked shaken. He stepped back as if distance would shield him from the weight of those words. She survived, but she doesn't sleep anymore. Her mother cries every night, and this bracelet, her father gave it to her the day before he died trying to dig a well with his bare hands. Pelosi clenched the bracelet tightly. It was sticky with old blood. You don't understand, she said, her voice finally cracking. I've tried to do good. Traoré looked into her eyes. Intentions don't clean graves. And suddenly Pelosi looked more human than she ever had before. Tears ran freely now, but the elevator still refused to move. For a moment, there was no sound, only breath and shame. Traoré stood still, eyes to the floor, not out of weakness, but out of the mourning. Pelosi stared at the bracelet in her palm like it was glowing. Her security guard stepped into the corner, unsure what to protect anymore. Then slowly Traoré looked up. "We don't want revenge," he said quietly. "We want respect. Dignity, a seat at the table, not as guests, as equals." Pelosi nodded, but the look in her eyes said something else. She wasn't sure she could fix on what had already been broken. Traoré continued, "You speak of values, freedom, democracy, but your silence is louder than any bomb." He pulled a folded document from his pocket, a U.S.-Africa trade agreement proposal. "We were told if we didn't sign this, aid would stop, not discussed, not negotiated, threatened." Pelosi looked at the document and whispered, "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," he replied. Then, a chime. The elevator jolted slightly. Power flickered, but the doors remained shut, as if the world outside still wasn't ready for what was happening inside. Suddenly, the sound of boots above the elevator shaft, fast, urgent. The guard perked up. "They found us." But Traoré didn't move. He stayed grounded. Pelosi folded the bracelet into her coat. Her hands still trembled. Outside, men shouted, the clanking of metal, the whirl of rescue tools. Inside, the three stood, each one transformed. Then Traoré asked quietly, "Tell me, Nancy, when you see a child from Africa, what do you see?" She looked startled. He continued, "Pity, a project, or just someone waiting to die?" She didn't answer. He stepped closer, gently, not threateningly. "I want you to see my nephew. I want you to see Acha. Not because I need your help, but because I need you to understand. We are not your shadows. We are not your burden." The elevator groaned again. Above, something metallic was forced loose. Light poured in from the shaft door. "Help is here," a voice called. But Pelosi didn't move, not yet, because she knew. When those doors opened, the world outside would want answers. And for the first time, she wasn't sure she had any. As the voices outside grew louder, Traoré spoke more softly. "I swore an oath," he said, "not to a flag, but to the children under our sky." Pelosi looked up. "My generals warned me not to come here." "You'll be humiliated," they said. "They'll trap you with protocol. Smile while they tighten the chains." He smiled faintly. "But I had to see with my own eyes. I had to speak, not as a soldier, as a son." A pause. Then he said something she wasn't ready for. "My mother always believed in America." Pelosi blinked. "She died with your medicine in her bag, sent by an NGO that never came to our village. She thought you cared." His eyes glassed over, but he didn't cry. "She died believing a lie. I came here to break it, so no more mothers believe in ghosts wearing democracy." Outside, tools whirred louder, but the loudest thing inside that elevator was the silence of truth. Traoré looked at Pelosi, not with hate, but with the ache of a son still healing. And finally, she looked back with the weight of a grandmother who had just inherited guilt too old to carry. The rescue team worked on the elevator doors. Screws clanged, sparks flickered. Inside, time slowed. Traoré sat down, not out of fatigue, but release. He unzipped his jacket slightly, revealing a small locket around his neck. Pelosi tilted her head. "This is not part of the uniform," he said, smiling gently. Inside the locket, a pressed flower, dried, faded, fragile. "My wife placed this here the day I took power," he said. "She said, 'Never forget to be soft, even in steel. Pelosi stared at the flower as if it were alive. I haven't seen her in 2 months. I told her I was going to a safe summit. He looked around the broken elevator and chuckled. Seems I lied. Pelosi finally smiled. A small, weary one. You still believe in love? He nodded without hesitation. I lead a revolution, yes, but I sleep with love in my chest. Otherwise, what's the point? The locket swung gently as he stood. Pelosi stared at the man before her. No longer just a revolutionary, but a husband, a son, a soldier with a soul. With a loud clang, the top shaft finally gave way. Flashlights flooded in. A metal panel slid open. Shouts echoed from the team above. "Ma'am, we've got you, sir! Please stay still!" But neither moved. Pelosi didn't speak. She looked down at the bracelet still clenched in her palm. Her voice shook. If I step out now, nothing changes, does it? Traoré looked at her. Change begins when truth is no longer seen as a threat. She stepped forward, almost, then paused. The world above was waiting with questions. The media would twist everything. His name would be smeared. The moment would be distorted. I can tell the truth, she said quietly, but they might not believe me. Traoré stepped beside her calmly. Then I will speak louder. They looked at each other, two leaders on opposite ends of history, now tethered by a silent promise. Above them, the rescuers extended a hand, but neither reached yet, because this elevator had become something sacred. It had become a confession box, a war room, a tomb of lies, and a cradle of truth. Before they climbed out, Traoré reached once more into his uniform. This time it wasn't a photo or a document. It was a letter, old, folded, frayed at the edges. Pelosi glanced at it. My last letter to Musa, he said. I never sent it. He died before I could. He began to read, slowly, voice tight. Musa, by the time you read this, I may be far away, but know this. Every step I take, I carry you. Your laughter still rings in my ears. They call me a leader, a captain, a force. But I am only your uncle, trying to keep a promise. That no more children will bleed in the name of lies, that the sun will rise without fear, that Africa will no longer bow, and that one day you would live free. By the end, his voice broke. Pelosi turned away, but couldn't stop the tears. Even the guard wiped his eyes. And for that moment, the capital became a village. The elevator, a grave. The letter, a prayer. And Ibrahim Traoré. He was not a politician. He was a man standing in the wreckage of love lost too soon. Pelosi couldn't stop shaking. Why didn't anyone tell us this? She asked. Why didn't I see it? Traoré stepped toward the cracked mirror panel in the elevator. He touched the glass gently. I did tell you. We screamed. We bled. We died in front of cameras, but no one looked. He pointed to his reflection. In here, you see a man with medals and anger, but I want you to see the boy I was. He placed his palm flat on the mirror. A boy who once thought America was magic, who watched your movies, studied your presidents, prayed you'd notice. Pelosi's voice quivered. And now? Traoré's reply came with a soft, haunting finality. Now I know. You saw us. You just chose not to care. Silence, again. But not the silence of awkwardness, the silence of something irreparable. And yet, Pelosi stepped forward. She placed her hand next to his on the mirror. I can't fix the past, she said. But I swear to you, Ibrahim, I will speak. He nodded. But inside, he wondered, would words be enough when blood had already dried? The rescue team opened the top hatch. Ropes were lowered. Hands reached in. Pelosi climbed first. As she rose, she whispered to her guard, make sure every second of that footage is saved. The guard nodded.
Then came Traoré's turn, but before he climbed, he turned around and looked at the elevator one last time. "This is where the lies stopped," he said, and the truth finally echoed. He touched the wall gently, like it held the voices of Musa, Aisha, Lumumba, Sankara, and so many forgotten names. Then he grabbed the rope and began to ascend. The camera, still running, caught the moment his boots left the floor, and for a second, time stood still, because a man who had been cast as a threat was now rising, and those who watched the footage days later would say, "We saw something holy in that moment." That elevator was more than steel, it was sacred ground, and as Traoré reached the top and sunlight touched his face, the world changed, even if just a little, even if just for a while.
The camera never stopped rolling. As Traoré stepped off the rope and stood beside Pelosi under the bright hallway lights, the atmosphere in the Capitol was frozen. Reporters swarmed, staffers shouted, security rushed forward. But Traoré didn't blink. Before anyone could speak, he leaned toward Pelosi and whispered. The mic caught it, just barely. "Tell them, Africa is no longer kneeling." The words hit like thunder. Pelosi looked him in the eye, then nodded slowly. Across the globe, the footage would air within hours. Millions watched as Ibrahim Traoré, clad in dusty fatigues, walked calmly down the marbled halls of Congress. No press conference, no apology, no fear, just silence, and the sound of history shifting. In Burkina Faso, women wept watching their leader. In Harlem, Detroit, Nairobi, Bamako, streets stood still, because for the first time, a black African man had stood in the belly of Western power and didn't flinch. A week passed. Traoré returned to Burkina Faso under nightfall. No speeches, no parades. But something had changed. At the gates of the presidential residence, a crowd was waiting. Not journalists, children. They held drawings, crayon pictures of an elevator, of him, of a woman crying, of a bracelet. One little girl stepped forward. Her name was Awa. She handed him a picture. It showed Traoré holding the broken bracelet in one hand and the whole continent of Africa in the other. Tears welled in his eyes. He knelt. "Why did you draw this?" She smiled shyly. "Because now, the world heard you." He hugged her tightly. For the first time in months, he let himself cry. Not for Musa, not for Lumumba, not even for Aisha. He cried for every moment he thought he was alone, only to find out he had been seen. And the future was no longer waiting to be invited. It had already arrived, in their hands. Months later, a special hearing was held in Washington. Pelosi testified, publicly. She told the full story, every moment, every tear, every truth. The footage was shown, unedited, raw, beautiful. The world watched. And Ibrahim Traoré? He watched from a quiet room in Ouagadougou, surrounded by children. When the final clip played, his whisper in the elevator, the children clapped. Aisha, now healing, squeezed his hand. "They believe you now." He smiled. "I didn't need them to believe me. I needed them to see us." Back in D.C., as the hearing ended, reporters swarmed Pelosi. "Do you regret letting him speak?" She paused, then said, tears in her eyes, "No, because when he spoke, the world finally listened. If this story touched you, if your eyes filled with tears, then don't scroll. Like this video to honor every Musa, every Aisha, every silenced voice. Comment below. We see you now. Let the world know you're listening, and if you believe truth still matters in a world full of noise, subscribe, because on this channel, we tell the stories they tried to bury, and we'll keep digging until justice rises.